The letter showed up on a rainy Wednesday morning. I remember the day because I was sitting at the breakfast bar in my apartment, finishing the quarterly financial report for one of my longtime clients when I heard the soft thump of the mail sliding through the front slot. Later, when everything had changed, I checked the security camera above my porch. The timestamp read 8:52 a.m. Among the usual flyers and bills was a certified envelope from the law firm of Parker, Mills, and Donovan. Inside was a single letter informing me that my grandfather, Thomas Edward Bennett, had passed away nearly 6 weeks earlier. It also explained that I had been named the primary beneficiary of his estate and that the attorneys wished to meet with me as soon as possible. The amount listed beside the estate nearly made me read the page twice. $22,300,470. The number was astonishing, but it wasn't what stayed with me. What stayed with me was realizing that my family had somehow allowed 6 entire weeks to pass without telling me that the man who had helped shape my life was gone. Welcome back to Heartwarming Tales, the place where kindness has a longer memory than conflict, and where the smallest acts of love often leave the biggest legacy. If you've ever discovered that quiet loyalty mattered more than loud promises, you're going to understand this story. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the greatest gift my grandfather ever gave me. My name isn't the important part. What matters is what I do every day. I've spent the last 11 years working as a certified financial planner. My job isn't simply about investments or retirement accounts. It's about helping families prepare for tomorrow. I help people organize their savings, protect what they built, and make thoughtful plans so future generations have a little less uncertainty and a little more security. Most people see numbers. I see stories. Every account tells me something about a person's hopes, sacrifices, and priorities. Every signature represents years of hard work. Every estate plan reflects the life someone hopes to leave behind. After more than a decade in this profession, I've learned that the most valuable inheritance isn't always measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in wisdom. My grandfather, Tom Bennett, built his success the old-fashioned way. He spent more than 40 years developing neighborhood shopping centers, restoring historic buildings, and investing patiently across the Midwest. He believed in shaking hands, keeping promises, and reading every contract twice before putting his signature on the last page. He wasn't the kind of grandfather who filled every room with jokes or dramatic speeches. His warmth showed up differently. He never missed one of my graduations. Every birthday, he mailed me a handwritten card instead of sending a text. The message was always exactly 3 sentences long. He remembered every promotion. He remembered every milestone. More importantly, he remembered to ask how I was doing and then waited quietly while I answered. Out of all his grandchildren, I was the one who called him every Sunday evening. Those conversations became one of the most dependable parts of my week. My parents loved my grandfather, especially as he grew older, but they showed that love differently. They organized appointments. They handled paperwork. They made sure everyone could see how involved they were whenever family gatherings happened. When Grandpa Tom moved into a beautiful retirement community in 2020, my mother carefully coordinated every detail of the move. She selected the community herself, completed the admission paperwork, and listed herself as his primary emergency contact. My father rented the moving truck and spent the weekend carrying furniture inside. They shared smiling family photos afterward, with captions about how blessed they felt to care for the people who had always cared for them. A week after moving in, Grandpa called me. He laughed softly and said the apartment was comfortable enough, but it still felt like someone else's home. The following Saturday, I drove almost 3 hours carrying his favorite reading lamp, a box filled with family photo albums, and the weathered checkers set we had played with ever since I was a little kid. We spent the afternoon laughing over old memories while playing game after game. He won every single one. I never mentioned that visit to anyone else. That was simply how our relationship worked. Some people express their love in public. We shared ours quietly. One conversation, one visit, and one ordinary afternoon at a time. Looking back now, I realize Grandpa noticed every one of those moments, even though he rarely said so out loud. Their support was genuine, but it was also the kind everyone could see. When Grandpa, Tom, moved from the home he had lived in for more than 40 years into a retirement community in 2020, my mother organized every detail. She toured several places before choosing one, completed all the paperwork, and made sure she was listed as his primary emergency contact. My father spent the weekend loading furniture into a rental truck and helping decorate the new apartment. Afterward, they posted cheerful pictures online of the move, smiling faces, boxes stacked neatly in the background. Grandpa sitting in his favorite chair. The caption read, "Home is wherever family is." A week after settling in, Grandpa called me. He told me everyone at the community had been kind. The food was better than he expected, and the nurses treated him well. Then he laughed quietly and admitted that the apartment still smelled like someone else's memories instead of his own. The following weekend, I drove nearly 3 hours to see him. I packed the old checkers set we'd played with since I was 10, the brass reading lamp that had always sat beside his recliner, and a small wooden box filled with family photographs from decades earlier. His face lit up the moment he saw them. We spent the afternoon talking about old vacations, birthdays, and holidays while playing to long games of checkers. Just like always, he beat me both times. I never mentioned the visit to my parents. There wasn't any particular reason. That was simply how our family operated. Some people showed love where everyone could applaud. Others shared it quietly without expecting anyone else to notice. Grandpa noticed both. At the time, I thought he was simply enjoying whatever time he had left. Only later did I realize he had been paying attention to far more than I understood. Grandpa Tom passed away peacefully on a Sunday morning the following spring. He was 81 years old. I didn't hear the news from my family. 3 days later, a longtime neighbor from Grandpa's old neighborhood called after seeing his obituary in the local newspaper. She assumed someone had already told me. They hadn't. The obituary listed every immediate family member. My parents were there. My sister was there. Even distant relatives appeared by name. Mine didn't. I remember exactly what I did that evening. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I opened the newspaper's website on my laptop, saved a screenshot of the obituary, printed a copy, and slipped it into a manila folder. By then, the funeral had already taken place the previous weekend. There had been flowers. There had been music. Friends had shared stories. Later, the neighbor mentioned there had also been a guest book near the entrance, a simple cream-colored book tied with a blue ribbon that Grandpa's longtime friend and volunteer companion, Evelyn Brooks, had thoughtfully brought for visitors to sign. My name wasn't inside it, not because I chose not to attend, because I never knew there was a service. I placed the obituary into the folder, carefully labeled it with Grandpa's full name and the date, then set it on my desk. For several minutes, I simply sat there. My hands rested flat against the wood surface. I noticed how quiet the room had become. 6 weeks later, another certified envelope arrived. This one came from Parker, Mills, and Donovan. I called the number immediately. A young associate confirmed my identity before explaining that senior partner, Richard Parker, hoped to meet with me regarding the estate of Thomas Edward Bennett, where I had been listed as the primary beneficiary. My voice never changed. I simply replied, "Thursday morning works perfectly. Thank you." That Thursday, I drove to their downtown office wearing the same charcoal suit I reserved for important client meetings. I carried a legal pad, 2 pens, and nothing else. No folder. Not yet. Richard Parker looked to be in his late 60s, calm, patient, and experienced enough to recognize when someone was trying very hard to remain composed. Waiting on the corner of his desk sat a neatly organized file box. Beside it rested a thick binder marked with colored tabs and several carefully arranged folders. Grandpa had hired Parker, Mills, and Donovan in 2019, well before moving into the retirement community. The firm had prepared every part of his estate plan, his will, his living trust, his charitable giving instructions. Everything had been reviewed and updated over the following years with remarkable attention to detail. As Mr. Parker gently opened the first binder, I realized my grandfather hadn't simply organized his affairs. He had spent years creating something far more meaningful than paperwork. He had built a legacy designed to keep helping people long after he was gone. Mr. Parker carefully opened another folder and explained that Grandpa Tom hadn't stopped planning after creating his original estate documents. In the spring of 2021, he reviewed everything once again. The updated paperwork was signed on May 12, 2021. That date has stayed with me ever since. I remember it because it came only a couple of weeks after my mother became Grandpa's official emergency contact at the retirement community. Around the same time, she proudly shared photos of the family helping him settle into his new home. Rather than making rushed decisions, Grandpa quietly scheduled a private appointment with Richard Parker. During that meeting, he reviewed every page of his will and trust, making sure they reflected exactly what he wanted his legacy to accomplish. According to the final documents, I was named trustee of the family foundation he wanted established after his passing. The investment accounts, valued at more than $18 million, were designated to fund scholarships, community programs, and charitable projects through that foundation. Several commercial properties were placed into a separate charitable trust that would continue supporting local organizations for years to come. One small lakeside cabin in northern Michigan, a place Grandpa had owned since the late 1980s, was left to Evelyn Brooks. Mr. Parker smiled as he read Grandpa's handwritten explanation. She brought friendship instead of obligation. She gave her time without ever asking for recognition. My parents were remembered as well. Each received a personal gift along with handwritten letters expressing Grandpa's appreciation for everything they had done throughout his life. Mr. Parker reached toward the small wooden box resting on his desk and gently slid it across to me. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. Next to it rested one worn checker piece from the old wooden set we had played together for decades. Beneath those items was a photograph taken the day I earned my professional certification. Grandpa had his arm around my shoulder, smiling proudly. I turned the picture over. In neat blue ink he had written, "You always notice the little details. Never lose that gift." I smiled despite the lump in my throat. Carefully, I placed the photograph back into the box. The letter could wait. First, I wanted to understand everything. I asked Mr. Parker to tell me the entire story from the beginning. He nodded. He explained that after moving into the retirement community, Grandpa had requested a complete review of every legal and financial document he owned. He wanted to make sure nothing had been overlooked. He also asked the law firm to maintain a careful record of every meeting, every conversation, every revision, and every charitable decision connected to his estate. He believed good planning should leave no unanswered questions, Mr. Parker said. Over the next several years, Grandpa met with the firm regularly. He updated beneficiary information. He expanded the scholarship program. He increased donations to organizations that had been meaningful throughout his life. He even added handwritten notes explaining why each decision mattered. Mr. Parker handed me a thick binder. It measured nearly 4 inches across. "I thought you'd want your own copy," he said. He was right. I remained in that conference room for hours. I carefully read the trust agreement, then every amendment, then page after page of Grandpa's notes, letters, and planning documents. Near the middle of the binder, I discovered something unexpected. It was a notarized letter Grandpa had written himself. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It was simply his thoughts on family, gratitude, generosity, and the importance of leaving behind opportunities instead of arguments. Every sentence sounded exactly like him: clear, thoughtful, never wasting a single word. The final line stopped me completely. I'll come back to that sentence later. When I finally left the office, the sun was already beginning to set. At home, I organized every document into a new binder arranged by date. Then I read everything a second time. Afterward, I made myself dinner, put an old jazz record on the turntable, and spent the rest of the evening quietly thinking about the incredible care Grandpa had taken to build something that would continue helping others long after he was gone. I didn't call anyone. A couple of weeks later, my mother called me instead. Her voice carried the calm, thoughtful tone she always used whenever she wanted the entire family together. She explained that the attorneys were still organizing Grandpa, Tom's estate, and that there were several charitable projects, scholarship plans, and family keepsakes everyone would need to discuss together. She wondered if I would come over for dinner the following weekend. I smiled and simply replied, "Of course. Just tell me what time." She explained that everyone wanted to gather for a family dinner. "There are a lot of memories, keepsakes, and plans to sort through," she said gently. "It would mean a lot if we could do it together." I told her that sounded like a good idea and asked what time I should arrive. The following Saturday evening, I walked into the house I had grown up in. Dinner felt surprisingly normal. My father sat at the head of the table, sharing stories about Grandpa Tom's favorite restaurants, fishing trips, and the lessons he had taught us over the years. Several times he smiled and said, "That's exactly what Tom would have wanted." My mother talked excitedly about preserving old family photographs and creating memory albums for future generations. She mentioned turning Grandpa's handwritten journals into a collection everyone in the family could enjoy. My younger sister, who had flown in from Seattle for the weekend, suggested creating a scholarship fundraiser each year in Grandpa's honor. None of us had seen the complete estate plan. None of us knew every detail Grandpa had arranged. We were simply sharing ideas based on what we believed would honor his memory. I listened. I enjoyed the meal. I smiled more than I spoke. Sometimes listening tells you far more than asking questions ever could. When dinner ended, my mother walked me to my car. She rested a hand on my shoulder and spoke with quiet sincerity. "Your grandfather depended on all of us during his later years," she said. "Everyone tried to help in their own way." Then she smiled. "I hope whatever happens with the estate, we remember that we're family first." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I think Grandpa hoped for the same thing." She nodded. "So do I." I wished her good night and climbed into my car. Instead of driving away immediately, I sat there for several minutes, thinking about everything Mr. Parker had shared with me. Finally, I called his office. When his assistant answered, I simply asked them to begin sending the information packets Grandpa had prepared for each member of the family. It wasn't about legal disputes. It wasn't about conflict. Grandpa had wanted everyone to understand his wishes in his own words. Now the time had come. 3 weeks later, another invitation arrived. This time it wasn't dinner. It was a family gathering in my parents' living room. My sister was there. My Aunt Linda had flown in from Colorado, along with her husband, Michael, who never missed an opportunity to offer advice whether anyone asked for it or not. The atmosphere felt thoughtful rather than tense. My mother had arranged the chairs in a large circle, hoping everyone could speak openly. She began by saying she wanted the family to stay united while carrying out Grandpa's legacy. My father agreed, reminding everyone that cooperation would make every charitable project and scholarship easier to organize. Michael enthusiastically offered several ideas for expanding the foundation and supporting additional community programs. My sister mostly listened quietly, occasionally smiling as everyone shared memories. When it was my turn, I asked politely, would it be all right if I shared something Grandpa left behind? Everyone nodded. I opened the folder I had brought with me. First, I placed Richard Parker's cover letter on the coffee table explaining Grandpa's planning process. Next came the updated trust documents describing the charitable foundation. Then I shared Grandpa's handwritten notes outlining why he had chosen each scholarship, donation, and community project. Finally, I placed the thick binder of supporting documents beside everything else. No one spoke for several seconds. The room became completely still. My mother slowly turned the pages. My father carefully read Grandpa's handwritten comments. Michael quietly leaned forward, suddenly far more interested in reading than offering opinions. Every page revealed another thoughtful decision, another carefully considered act of generosity, another reminder that Grandpa had spent years planning how his kindness could continue helping people he would never even meet. There wasn't any argument, only silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize someone they loved had thought much farther ahead than any of them had imagined. My father looked up from the papers, clearly overwhelmed, as he tried to find the right words. My father slowly stood, overcome with emotion. For a moment, it looked as though he wanted to speak immediately, but no words came. I smiled gently and said, Dad, let's all stay seated. Grandpa wanted these conversations to bring us together. He looked at me for a second, nodded, and quietly sat back down. From my folder, I removed one final page. It was Grandpa Tom's handwritten letter. Unlike the legal documents, this page wasn't about money or property. It was about the people he loved. I read one passage aloud. I've learned that real love isn't measured by who receives the applause. It's measured by the people who quietly keep showing up, year after year, expecting nothing in return. Those are the people who build a family worth remembering. No one spoke. The room became completely silent. My Aunt Linda brushed away a tear before covering her mouth. Across the room, my sister stared down at the coffee table for several long seconds. Finally, she spoke. I never knew Grandpa wrote that. Her voice was soft, completely sincere. I simply nodded. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed the worn wooden checker piece beside Grandpa's letter. I smiled. He always chose the darker pieces. When I was little, I once asked him why. He laughed and said, because whoever moves second has to pay closer attention. For the first time that afternoon, everyone smiled. The tension that had quietly filled the room seemed to disappear. When the gathering ended, I put on my coat. Instead of saying goodbye with uncertainty, I looked around the room and said, I think Grandpa would be happy if we honored his wishes together. Everyone nodded. Over the following months, Richard Parker completed the administration of Grandpa's estate exactly as he had planned. Every scholarship was funded. Every charitable donation was transferred. Every property found the new purpose Grandpa had carefully chosen years before. The lakeside cabin became Evelyn Brooks' home, just as Grandpa intended. When she called to thank me, we spent nearly an hour sharing stories about him. More than once we laughed through tears. My parents received Grandpa's personal letters. They never shared what he had written. I never asked. Some messages belong only to the people they were written for. Several weeks later, my sister called. She said she'd been thinking about Grandpa's letter every day. She admitted that, over the years, life had become so busy that she'd stopped making time for the small moments Grandpa valued most. She wanted to change that. She apologized not because anyone demanded it, but because she genuinely wished she had visited him more often. I thanked her for telling me. We talked for nearly an hour. That conversation became the beginning of a much closer relationship than we'd ever shared before. Aunt Linda called a few days later. Michael did too. Before long, our family started gathering again. Not because lawyers scheduled meetings, but because we actually wanted to spend time together. The worn checker piece now sits on my desk between my computer monitor and the reading lamp. Grandpa once loved. Whenever I'm helping clients prepare their own estate plans, I glance at it. It reminds me that the documents people sign today become tomorrow's stories. The foundation Grandpa created continues to grow. Each year, the Thomas E. Bennett Scholarship supports first-generation college students who dream of building better lives for themselves and their families. The first scholarship recipients attended an award ceremony last spring. I mailed Evelyn a photograph afterward. A week later, she sent me a handwritten card. 3 sentences. Just like Grandpa used to write. I also helped expand a nonprofit, financial education program that provides free estate planning, workshops for senior citizens, ensuring more families have the opportunity to preserve both their memories and their wishes. The remaining funds have been invested carefully so the foundation can continue serving future generations. If there's one thing I want people to remember from this story, it's this. I didn't spend my energy trying to prove anyone wrong. I spent it making sure one remarkable man's kindness continued reaching people he would never have the chance to meet. In the end, that became the greatest inheritance of all. Looking back, I realized something important. I didn't spend all those months protecting Grandpa Tom's wishes because I was angry. Anger burns brightly for a moment, but it rarely builds anything that lasts. I stayed committed because someone I loved had invested years of careful thought into creating a legacy that reflected his values. Every document, every handwritten note, every scholarship, and every charitable gift represented a lifetime of wisdom. He believed that generosity should continue long after he was gone, and he trusted that someone would carry those plans forward with the same care he had used to create them. That trust meant more to me than any dollar amount ever could. Throughout my life, many people confused quietness with weakness. They assumed that because I wasn't the loudest person in the room, I wasn't paying attention. They believed that because I listened more than I spoke, I wouldn't step forward when it truly mattered. But there's a tremendous difference between being quiet and being passive. Grandpa understood that better than anyone. He paid attention to the little things. He noticed who remembered birthdays without reminders, who showed up for ordinary afternoons, who called simply to ask how he was feeling, who stayed after everyone else had gone home. He believed that character revealed itself through consistency rather than grand performances. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The greatest gift Grandpa left behind wasn't the foundation. It wasn't the investments. It wasn't even the scholarship that now helps first-generation college students pursue their dreams. Those things are wonderful, but they aren't his greatest legacy. His greatest legacy was the reminder that kindness, patience, integrity, and quiet faithfulness always leave a lasting mark on the people around us. Long after applause fades, long after photographs are forgotten, long after documents have been filed away, people remember how you made them feel. They remember who showed up. They remember who stayed. Today, when I help families create estate plans of their own, I encourage them to think beyond money. I ask them what values they hope their grandchildren will inherit, what stories they want remembered, what acts of generosity they hope will continue long after they're gone. Those conversations have become the most meaningful part of my work. Every time I glance at Grandpa's old checker piece sitting beside my computer, I'm reminded that the smallest objects often carry the biggest memories. It reminds me to slow down, to listen carefully, to value people over possessions, and to never underestimate the quiet impact of simply being present. If this story reminded you that small acts of kindness often become someone's favorite memories, hold on to that thought. If it encouraged you to call a grandparent, visit an old friend, or spend an extra afternoon with someone you love, then Grandpa's legacy is still doing exactly what he hoped it would. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Heartwarming Tales. If stories about compassion, family, hope, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people speak to your heart, I'd love for you to subscribe and join our community. Leave a comment and share a memory about someone who quietly changed your life. I read every one of them. Until next time, take care of the people you love. Treasure the moments that seem ordinary today. And remember that the kindest hearts often leave the greatest legacy. I'll see you in the next story.